Hello, I will indeed especially talk a bit more about like what are the internal things happening, giving rise to goal-directed behavior, and well, and also I will especially also, so it's a work in process, so there will be some questions or like pieces of things. Things. It's like with the complete slides.
Maybe down, yeah.
So yeah, we gave you already spoke about the example of the wind. So well, first for me, like I think goal-directed, like if we think about it, like the main thing is about like the system decides the direction or what it's doing itself. So what you say, like self-determination. So I think it's like not being pushed, just pushed by external forces. So we already gave some definitions. So I think that's like the main intuitive idea, but then the question is like what is it deciding and so on. So I think like the example of the wind is still interesting because like with sailing, the thing is that there is some input, but the system can like choose what to do with its input. That's kind of why I like why it's like not a system that's completely independent outside of the external forces, but it can like use these to go into the direction it wants. So well, we also already spoke about like goal-directedness as like equifinality, where there's like a negative feedback, and I think negative feedback can be understood broadly as when there's like equifinality when there's like different circumstances that always goes to the same kind of thing so it can self-maintain in different circumstances. But then so that's kind of the idea where there's some kind of stability reached, there's something that is kept stable, but also like if we another what Marta mentioned, what Maceo mentioned, is like another thing is like autopoiesis is also like self-creation, where it's like not just keeping the same, but it's also like creating yourself, directing your own change. So you don't like this idea of just self-maintaining system is sometimes it looks a bit like too rigid sometimes. So so the idea is that you won't there will be a change, but it should be directed by the system. And like one way to think about it is that certain things change, other things don't change. So like in COT, when an organization within an organization you have like the species maintained, but there's like some concentrations change. So which processes are used change, but there's like at some level change, and then there's like, but that's still where there's like structurally the same, and then more change would be if there's like the system itself changes, and then the question is like, when is it still the same? When is this? So in general, I'll speak like a bit. My talk will be like two main topics. So first, like more like how can we model negative feedback in COT? So where the structure still remains the same. So is there always a negative feedback in COT? When is there? When isn't there? And then subdivision, I will speak a bit motives, building blocks within an organization. And then I will speak about like how could an organization change, and when is it still like autopoietic? So feedback in general can be understood as negative feedback is if it's stability. So if you have more of A, you get less of A. If you have less of A, you get more of A. So it's like one loop, one cycle of negative influence, or you can also see it as like an odd number of negative influences. And positive feedback is when there's instability, when more of A creates more of A. So it's like an even number of negative signs. So So to speak about this in COT, we should make an assumption, because what we want to see is, if we, well, it's like a specific instantiation of negative feedback. What we want to see is if concentration changes, what happens, and so to know what happens, we should specify a bit about what happens with the flux factor, because like in general in COT we just assume there is a flux factor for which is self-maintaining, but like we already discussed it a bit this morning or something. If this flux factor can like, if there's like only one instance where it can be reached, and as soon as we move out of this flux factor, the system falls, and it's not really self-maintaining in the sense that it can self-maintain in different circumstances, can only instantiate one instance. So that's why, and so, but so to know what happens to the flux factors, we should specify a bit the dynamics of the flux factor. And so I make the assumption, well, in general, I call it monotonic dependency, but so it's like the general assumption actually that the more you have of reactants, the bigger your flux factor is. So we already assume like the reactant, if the reactant is present, that the reaction happens. And so we now also assume that the more the reactant is there, the more it happens. So mass action kinetics is like a specific instance of this, but can also be like different things. And I think it's kind of a specific on the flux factor, but it's like still a bit still broadly, and like you also can work more general than this specific instance. But then if you assume this thing, then you can say one species influences another species if there's a reaction where A is the reactant, and then the other species is either consumes or produces. So then, because then we have, if the reactant is depending on how much the reactant is present, that will influence the production or consumption of the species. So if we don't want to assume anything about the kinetic things, we can also just assume like anything that influences the production or consumption of the species is like an influence. Then we can say, so we can say it's like a positive influence if B is produced. So because then we have, the more we have of the reactants, the more we have of B. And then a negative influence if like it's if B is consumed. Now we can generalize this influence if there's like a chain of influences. We could then also look to like mutually influencing species. So if and like mutually influencing species, they follow up, they follow their parts which are like equivalence classes. So if you look to the mutually influencing species, there are like equivalence clauses, and then we can like separate, decompose the network a bit into like different parts that are like one part is influencing the other part, and then that part is influencing another part. But like, and then we should only look to this part that is mutually influencing, because if it's whatever it's influencing, it doesn't really matter for that part itself. And like this influence, it cannot influence this influence, so it will like, we can consider it can be like a catalyst that's influencing this part, or it could be like an input. So we could like model it like just consider the mutually influencing parts. And then within these parts, we can look to like different possibilities. So it could be that they're like mutually producing. There's like an influence of mutually producing, or it could be like mutually consuming. So we could like consider different possibilities and then investigate all these possibilities. So that's a bit looking to different motives. So the problem now is that in an organization, often the feedback is not really straightforward to see, because like if you have even like an extremely simple network like this, there are lots of cycles, and some are like a negative feedback, like there's always a negative feedback on the species on itself, but then there's a positive feedback of like C producing A producing C, for example, but then there's a negative feedback of C consuming B producing A producing C. So it's not immediately clear whether it will be in the end result like a negative feedback, positive feedback, whether it will reach stability or not. That's kind of the problem. So So, but like we see for mutually producing species, there is some kind of negative feedback. So if there are like a species A producing B, B producing A, so that's like a simple motive, which could also be like a more complex cycle. We see that if A would be more produced than A would be more consumed than produced, then this V1 would be bigger than V2, so it will A would diminish, but which means if A diminish and A would diminish, and automatically B will also increase because B will be produced. But then because A diminishes, it will be consumed less, and also B is produced, so the production will increase, and so A will like reach this level. So they were like unequal, and they will like reach stability because A will be like produced more and B will be consumed more, and they will reach like stability. So we see here that it moves to an equilibrium because if like, so we always have, if it's consumed, if a species is consumed, that the flux increases, so that it's like being less consumed, so that's like will be produced more, so it will be like going to a self-maintaining state. And then also, but the problem is we don't know what happens to the production rates. If the production rates also, if the consumption rate lowers, but also the production rate lowers, then it will never like reach the self-maintaining. So in this example, we see that the production rates also increases, so it's reaching. But like, so it's still a hypothesis that in these mutually influencing parts there is some kind of negative feedback, but we should still prove it. And so the problem is we don't know what happens to the.
What will be influencing?
So influencing is like what I defined as like if A is a reactant in the reaction, and it's like producing or consuming a certain species.
Yeah.
So and then so that's direct influence, and then if there's like a chain of influence, there's like a. So the thing is that we know that like if a species, so within these parts, because it's like mutually influencing, we know it's influencing something, so it's consumed. We assume like it's an organization, so it's self-maintained, so it's produced, so it's both consumed and produced. So we know if like it's more consumed than produced, then the consumption rate will lower because it will the flux factor will so A will decrease, so the flux factor will decrease. So we know the consumption rate will lower, so it was already the argument given by Francis this morning. The problem is we don't really know what happens with the production rate. So we saw with the example of mutually producing that also production rate happens, but it's not immediately clear yet to see whether it's always the case. And I will later give an example where I think it's like not, there's no negative feedback. I think there's not always the case. So yeah, there's so the other part that's influencing, it can still also influence the self-maintaining. So there, for example, can be like a catalyst where, depending on how far this catalyst is present, it depends on it will depend like whether the organization whether that part is like self-maintaining or not. Because like if it's more present, it will maybe produce it more, while it's less present, it will like not produce it enough. So we see that there's still some dependence on the inputs, and we can like make it less dependent by some kind of negative feedback, so to influence the input. And then what you will see is actually that there are like the parts are reconnected again. Or it could also be like if there's an abundant input, it's also like not dependent on it. Or it could be that there are like degenerative pathways, that there are like different pathways that can be taken to use a different input, or internal paths where it's. So then what we will want to do to reach this less dependence is to have a change in the structure. So we have some But so if you have a change in the structure, then the question is even more important. Like, when is this self created? When is the autopoiesis not interrupted because there are changes? So when is this changes like triggered by the system or not? And I'm going to give like different stances, different ideas about these things, which are, I think, related, but are. So one idea is that it's not interrupted if it becomes more resilient. So if it's like basically if the change makes that it can be autopoietic in more circumstances, then it's like still the same autopoietic system. It can be like by creating extra pathways, use of extra inputs, and then versus the idea that the change can like decrease also the resilience, where there's like, for example, parasitic modes where change. But like even in this case, it can be that certain things disappear, and then the question like also like, or like the parasitic modes, you could also say maybe it's that specific structure has like really a strong autopoietic thing where it can really self-maintain in a lot of circumstances. So
can you define parasitic mode?
So I think it's like where basically the idea is that it's like not autopoietic in a lot of circumstances. So you have so it's like the opposition of being, so you have like a system, and it can change where it's like it can adopt, it can still survive in more circumstances, while it can also be a change where it's like, for example, where it's like cannot maintain in that many circumstances. For example, like if you have like sugar, if you eat sugar, you can be like it's an autopoietic system, but you will not survive that many circumstances. So it's like it reduces your resilience. So
I was rather thinking of something in the style of a virus that enters your system and uses some of the reaction pathways to reproduce itself. So it is kind of parasitizing and therefore reducing your resilience.
Yeah, but I think the example of the sugar can also be like, for maybe bacteria which eat sugars, which triggers your system to like sugar and eat sugar. And there's also like, it's kind of a similar thing where it's like virus eating you or like, using your system.
Also, energy production by humans relative to the biosphere. So it's kind of like long-term parasite.
Yeah. So so what you have here is, it's also like relative to what is it autopoietic, like, because like for the virus it's like better circumstance for your body, not in general. Think could if you have a change in the system, then I think it can be like autopoietic for certain parts and not autopoietic for other parts, because certain parts will disappear. So it's like not autopoietic for them. So I think rather than seeing a system as having only one goal of maintaining autopoiesis for like the whole thing, you can see it as like a coordination between goals, where on a basic level you could see a chemical organization. You have different species. If you consider this species as having the goal of maintaining themselves, of course, having one species to have a goal is maybe a bit too far-fetched, but like consider that these species wants to self-maintain itself, then you have a chemical organization. It's actually a configuration where there are some processes that consume this species that are like not good for the goal of this specific species, and then there are other reactions which produce it, so that are beneficial for it. But actually, like the whole organization is like a certain configuration, so that everybody is like happy, where everything is produced enough, and in the whole interaction, actually also these consuming reactions are needed for producing these species. So it's like cannot just say this is good, this is bad, but it's like the whole interaction between them that creates this organization. And it's like, so it's like more an interaction between goals than like one main goal or something. And so it depends a bit on the perspective, whether it's like, so if there's a change and certain species disappear, then for these species, it's not self-maintaining anymore, but so for this, but still, sometimes what you can have that some species can like restore, that they can act as seeds that can restore the other species. So we could see that they play a different role. So then the third perspective, you could say, is like there is the autopoiesis is not interrupted if it can restore. So that's kind of the idea of where you have can activate or deactivate pathways. So for example, the DNA can activate certain pathways, deactivate certain pathways, but they're already like ingrained inside the system. Or like you could go to a dormant stage, and then once a food molecule is present, you go back to the stage you had. So it's like, so the general idea is you're continuously autopoietic if you can go back. So the idea is if you delete a species, you might have another organization, but if you then add that species again, if you then still have the same organization, then there's like still the autopoiesis still remains. Or like the same if you would add a species, or also it could be more like a reaction or something. So some examples where there's no restorative function is like in our body with the heart and the lungs. If you don't have oxygen anymore, our heart stops pumping, and after a while, even if we get oxygen again, the heart will not get moving again, so the system dies. So often this kind of motif like this, where there's like A that is producing itself but also needs a B. So it can be like a simple thing like this, or it can be being produced in like some complicated cycle. So if then B falls away, then A won't be produced anymore, so A will also fall away. And then if A comes back, then it can still not be produced because B is, if B comes back, A cannot be produced because A is not there. And this is actually also an example where the negative feedback, I think, doesn't work, because if we take B away, or if there's like not enough of B, then A will like disappear. And so it will also like not be able to restore. So a fourth idea is that the autopoiesis, like that if it's like triggering the change itself, it's like in general we see something as goal-directed if the change is triggered itself. Because also there's the idea of reversibility. It's like it can capture some things, but some changes we like, for example, human systems, novelty can create things that are like irreversible, but we would, so the idea is that still autopoietic, it's like decided by the system. But then the question is, how do we tell whether it's decided or not? Also, a criticism of COT sometimes is that it's like deterministic, especially if you like assume mass kinetics or some kind of fixed thing. So an easy solution to impose this kind of decision in COT is just to have like a decider in the system. I think Thomas spoke a bit about it, that you can like, you have like you can decide the different reaction rates, but this sounds a bit arbitrary to me, because we're interested in seeing like how can goal-directedness emerge. So then you're just imposing that it's already goal-directedness, that there's already something deciding. So our question is more like, how can this decision structure emerge? I think we'll see how
If there would be some kind of a learning mechanism, like what we spoke about after the talk of Peter, if there would be different possible reactions and the decider would be reinforced whenever it makes a good decision and be.
Yeah,
But yeah, of course, it makes
I
it
think
really much,
indeed,
much more
yeah, or
complex.
also Marcel with is creating the constraints. I think in general, what you have, I think you can see a catalyst as influencing the reaction rates, and like you can see a catalyst as pure biological enzymes, but I think also like you could see a catalyst just as something that influences a reaction, but isn't like consumed producing this reaction. So then, for example, you could also see a blood vessel as kind of a catalyst that makes a certain reaction possible. So it's more like seeing it as something that triggers a certain reaction. Now, indeed, it's like if you have like a decision system, then it can produce certain catalysts can decide like influence what it do. And so on this question about determinism, I thought a bit about it. I think one way to see it as that it's not determined, that's indeterministic, is that first it can be there can be different inputs, different environmental changes, and these are indeterministic. So and these changes will influence the system, but like you cannot predict beforehand in what way it will influence it. Also, like because you don't really know which reactions are triggered, like you could see it. I mean, in reality, you don't know which synergies will emerge from certain reactions. You can feel like already have some reaction that were given. It's like in our model already there, but like conceptually, you can see it's like unknown. And then also the system will change, and in different moments, it will have different specifics. So it can have different process rates, different concentrations, but also even like structurally different species. So that makes that it's like not completely determined how the system will react. Well, we still want to, if it's goal-directed, it should still influence this the action itself. So it's should be so to remain autopoietic. So the outcome should be decided by the system. So in general, what you have is like the system can like recognize a certain input or like, and then decides what to do with it. And so this recognition and decides what to do, it means that it triggers the necessary reactions to do. So it means that certain input can trigger certain reactions. So I made a small toy illustration to try to explain this mechanism a bit. So consider you have like an organization. Then the question is, what happens if it gets like different organizations that's emerged, or different species or different reactions. I'm not sure whether it matters, but the thing is, it's encounters something else, and so it could either decide, for example, the red one, it can decide to not use it, to like consume it, so to catalyze its consumption, while it can like, for another one, it can create an extra pathway where so here there's like a degenerate pathway created where the B triggers also the production of C, so it's like less dependent on the A to have the C. So if this would fall out, then still the reaction can happen. So that's kind of a really toy model of how this could happen, where especially I think catalyzing certain effects. So in general, I spoke about a bit different perspectives on non-interrupted autopoiesis. So one is that it can deal with more circumstances, so more resilient, and then it kind of relates that it can restore itself, because if it can deal with more circumstances, like if it cannot restore a certain circumstances, it cannot go back to. So if it can deal with more circumstances, it can restore in more situations. And then, but you can also see it relativistic as that it's like more coordination between goals, and some goals will change, some goals will remain the same, and can also maybe trigger which goals it's keeping note. And then yeah, it's also like the last one where the idea is really that's like not just like self-maintaining thing, but like self-determined. So what I think Marcelo talked also a bit about it, where it's like really also the self causing its own constraints or like triggering the change itself. I think sometimes maybe it's like not always all things, but they were like related. So in general, what we have is like we have like a change. So this change, you could see it as a perturbation, but I think it can also be like an opportunity. Could be internal, it could be external. It could be like, structural changes more like just process stages. So in general, we have a change, and this creates a change in the system. But like, so it's kind of a cascade of things, and we could say that something remains, and that something is the goal. But like this something that's remaining is not necessarily certain species or process, or like could be can be like certain core species, or it could be like every species should be there, or it could be like it's a certain configuration, maybe topologically, that there's like we have like the same kind of structure even if it's like different instances. And well, you could actually see in COT also like we also always have consumption production of species, where we consider these species as like the same species, but whether it's like the same or not the same, it's like whether it's A goes to B goes to A, or C goes to D goes to C. You could see it as like the same thing, but then if you look to the bigger picture, these A's will maybe react to different things than the C, so still it's like not really the same. So it's like different things, and then but like what is being kept, it also depends on the circumstances. It's like also, or like, so certain goals will, like certain things will remain in certain circumstances, but then not anymore in other circumstances. It's kind of also relativistic, and also change. And so to deal with different circumstances can be like by a negative feedback, or like by creating extra pathways. So it's like still these were like some ideas we were working on. This is like work in process. So further work where I think we can discuss is first to either prove or disprove whether there's like a negative feedback in a organization when there's like mutual influence, and like, or like in which cases it is and in which cases it isn't. I think that's like one still open question. And then another question I try to discuss a bit. The second part is like to clarify like what is goal-directedness if the system is changing. It was my presentation.
Thank you. So we have some time for questions. Yeah, Francis, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to put a little bit of a more concrete context on what Evo has been saying, because Evo has been speaking in very abstract terms. So I want to put it also a little bit like a challenge to Matteo. Self-maintenance sounds very good, and in the case of the biological organism that we know well, that means our own body, it's kind of obvious when it is what it means. Self-maintenance, it means staying alive. But when you're starting to look at systems that don't have a very clear boundary, they change, and at some moment you can say they change into something that's something different. And self-maintenance, then is the question, what is the self? What is being maintained? I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago. So have I self-maintained or have I changed? And to make it more concrete, I thought of the example. There's a lot of talk nowadays about the ketogenic diet, which is the diet people used to lose weight quickly. Now, normally the body is digesting carbohydrates, turning them into glucose, using that glucose as fuel. With a ketogenic diet, you don't eat carbohydrates, so your body is forced to start using fats as fuel, and it turns this fat into ketone bodies, which then are used as a fuel. So it's as if your body is switching to a different kind of metabolism. Now, if you think that purely in terms of a chemical organization of a self-maintaining reaction network, somebody in ketosis is a different metabolism than somebody who is eating carbohydrates. So from an autopoietic point of view, is that still the same person? To us, it seems obviously the same person because we're thinking in terms of the physical topological boundary. We don't see what's happening inside the person. We kind of assume it's the same. But if you start thinking about systems that are much less well defined, like bacteria and fungi and ecosystems and these kind of plants that vegetatively spread, myceliums, it's very difficult to say where one organism starts and where another one begins and where are the boundaries. And then these problems become much more difficult, like when is it still the same system?
I want to tackle this. So, Luhmann, for example, he said that the identity of the system is solely based on the difference of the system and environment. And the question is if you're keeping your exact environment and only the subsystems that can formate within you. If they are changing, you are you would be still the same person.
But both are changing, the environment and the inside. So, the environment is always
okay.
in
Yeah, maybe with okay, with the that would be one problem with the ketosis diet. You could say, so the lumen is still in my body, but this is still the environment. Yes.
But I think this operational closure understood by the loop of constraint is actually an answer, because the constraint is like, what is the metabolism used for? It's like what is the kind of like a constraint of the useful metabolism? Does it still fuel your brain, heart, lungs, and everything? It does. So kind of.
Well, most constraints will be maintained, of
Yeah.
course, but some constraints, namely there are certain enzymes that are transforming glycogen into glucose and sending it to the brain. Those enzymes will have gone from the system, and instead other enzymes that produce ketone bodies will have come into being, and these will now be the dominant
And
constraints.
the complex organism is kind of like an ecology of different autopoietic systems. Yes? So you have like immune system is an autopoiesis, each cell is an autopoiesis. And so this one, you switch from one to another, which are both autopoietic, but within a larger loop of an autopoietic organism. Yes? So I think it's
But
kind
the
of like a
immune system is
nested thing.
a nice example. What we heard previously, the talk about the virus immunity. The antibodies are added to the organization at a certain moment. The antibodies are created, and the antibodies are a constraint that wasn't there before. Now, all of this seems trivial compared to the complexity of a whole body, but since our problem is the origin of goal-directedness, we're looking at things where there isn't that much stable structure yet.
Yes.
And then these things become important, like if you're thinking in terms of autocatalytic cycles and you add a reaction and you take away something, is it still the same cycle or is it something different? Not obvious problems.
And the other way around, be interesting. Could you change without an input from environment? If the environment does not change, can you change?
You
So
have
if
also
you're not
an
getting
internal
input.
environment. Yes.
Yeah.
Like depending how complex you are. What is your
But can a system, so you have then a sub-environment, you are the sub-environment for your subsystems. But
and the other way
can a
around.
system, but can a system change without input from outside at all?
Yeah,
I mean, quantum mechanically, there's always indeterminism, so there can always be some quick reaction that creates a molecule that creates a cancer cell and turns you into a different stuff.
Which answer do you prefer? We can work with it.
Okay, I don't know the quantum mechanics.
No, but if you go to the 3 layers you were describing, maybe the inner workings of the system can raise its own temperature, or some variable. So the inner workings, keeping the environment stable, so the inner workings, and at some point that will make a change in the layer of DNA or something, create the new proteins to change the metabolism, and so there could be like a metamorphosis in the Kafkian sense even.
Actually, the metamorphosis is a very nice example.
Yes.
I don't remember whose paper I heard about it, but these things like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. The difference between those two systems is so big that you really would be hard-pressed. If people didn't know that caterpillars turn into butterflies, they would never have thought that these are the same things.
Yes.
Is it still the same autopoietic system? Is it self-maintenance if the caterpillar turns into a butterfly?
But this is, Francis, this, oh, sorry to interrupt you.
No, because it was, you said that it's essentially a challenge for interpreting the story in terms of constraints, but I don't know if.
In terms of self-maintenance, the question is what is being maintained.
Precisely the point. That the idea that I have is that precisely focusing on the idea that what must be maintained is a set of constraints that depend on each other, doesn't say in principle anything on the fact that what is this list of constraints. So the system can change. There is nothing in the fact constraint that you have to maintain a work constraint cycle that the list of constraints is supposed to be fixed. Quite on the contrary. So the point is that whatever picture you are taking of system at some point, you are able to build a sort of closed graph of relation between the constraints. But because, as I was saying, if the purpose of the system is maintains existence, then it's compatible with the effect of changing. The system is not conservative in a principle sense. It is conservative because you cannot change everything all the time, of course. But I really do not see the limitation. Of course, it's not easy to understand as a system can evolve, because if everything depends on everything, that is not restricted to closure of constraints. If everything depends on everything, how to change a thing without making the system collapse? So how to change one node or many nodes without, given that everything depends on everything, that you have to provide an explanation of how change innovation is possible without making the system collapse. But for me, that is a problem, is a general problem on any theory that applies to some sort of circularity, not specific to the interpretation in terms of constraints. So I don't know if
No, I don't think it's a particular problem. I think it's a general problem.
Yeah.
It's a general problem we have, and in the case of biological entities, we all have an intuitive view that it's still the same thing. But in terms of social systems, there it becomes very much more difficult. You have organizations that start doing completely different things and use a different logo and start going to different markets. And is it still the same organization?
But I would also want to add that maybe we have a problem that we are kind of insisting on sameness rather than dynamics. Because if you thought that circularity is a kind of vehicle for kind of like creation of stable mechanisms for changing systems, you know, like kind of. Then you could take like stable sameness as a kind of like an exception that this is kind of like a collapse that it's not changing. So like which concept we take first, the sameness or changeability also reframes how we are looking at those exceptions. Yes. So if you thought that circularity is kind of like a you know spiral thing that is like a vehicle for like continuous changing of state. And you wouldn't be asking this question, is it the same or not the same? Because this is the sameness. The changeability, the process of changeability is the same.
I mean, my intuition also says it's a question of continuity. But continuity looks very clear, but if you start thinking about these kind of difficult cases, then it's
But
not
you
always
have the
anymore.
process ontology as the primary ontology. Yes? So, like, yes, is this the same because that's a process? Yes. So the fact that it's not like identical.
No, but the process itself changes.
Okay, but
The question is, what's the difference between destroying something and rebuilding a different one, or having it changed into a different one? We have the feeling like, well, destroying it and rebuilding it, and it wasn't there when it was destroyed, but maybe the process of rebuilding it kind of destroys so much that it is kind of destroyed. It's well, it's an old philosophical problem. Apparently, it's called the boat of Orpheus. I think it was Orpheus that
Theseus.
Theseus, yes.
These are Argonauts.
Yes. That if the boat all the time they are changing planks here and there, and after a while not a single plank of the original boat is still there, is it still the same boat? We are inclined to say yes, it's the same because the organization of the boat is the same. But even the organization, if you put it in terms of COT, the organization can change while there is some kind of a continuity. So when is the autopoiesis not interrupted? That's the question.
Sorry, another part of the story is that you change the parts of the boat because the boat is you crosses the ocean, and then you keep the parts that you have changed, and when you arrived, you rebuilt a second boat with the old parts. So which is the same that the original one, the one that is functionally continuous, or the one you have materially constructed?
These are the kind of fake philosophical problems.
That's another philosophy.
But there is, I think so Maturana and Varela talk about the difference between organization and structure. So this, in the case of a butterfly, like from the caterpillar to the butterfly, you can say that the system is all the time the same in the terms of autopoiesis because the organization must be autopoietic, so the system must self-produce at any time, but the structure change. So at least they made this distinction to start on. So it means that systems in general, in their structure, they can change, but makes the organization all or nothing. Means that once the system is alive, there is no a halfway between life and non-life. It is or it is not. So it is autopoietic or it is not autopoietic. And the structure is that it is allowable to change.
Well, for living organisms that have this very complicated autopoietic structure, there it's usually clear what's the difference between a life and death. When you're thinking in terms of the origin of life and autocatalytic cycles changing, losing some chemicals, adding some chemicals, then it becomes more tricky.
Not clear what is alive and what is not alive. In medicine, it's absolutely not clear. So it's very hard to find a definition of life and not being alive in medicine. So I think there's no strict.
Yeah, and also for organisms like us, like mammals, it's usually pretty clear. But for example, for plants and fungi, they're all usually a tree. They're all parts that die, and then something shoots again, and then maybe a root still shoots. And is it the same tree? And
yeah, I would like to bring in a point, which is the one of the time scales. When we think about these things, we tend to. And it's related to your notion of constraint as well, because I think it's a philosophical question, maybe too far from a smart question, maybe even. But if you say that I will go back to the example of the river, that the river is modifying its own bed, and what if that I'm just asking that in principle we cannot falsify, I think, that this might have a geophysical, due to nonlinearities of complex systems and so on, this might create some sort of butterfly effect that in the long run will create more range so that the whole system in the end will create, and so the river is maintained. So the fact, do you see what the argument is? Like, let's just increase a lot the scope of the consequences of the actions that things do, right? This never ends, I think.
Just to
So yeah,
okay.
yeah, please.
Just to clarify, my view, because this example of the water cycle is everywhere in all the philosophical literature about circularity. I would say the water cycle is a self-maintaining system because we have a cycle of transformations that fall back. The question is, can we say that is my self-maintaining in a way which is in a principal way different from the way in which organisms are self-maintaining? So you would have a general category of self-maintenance, and then in some cases you have self-maintenance which is biological, where the constraints are involved. So you can admit that and say, well, the water cycle can do many things, but its condition of existence do not depend on the fact that it's turning. So you can stop it and then making it happen again. So you put water and starts again. Nothing has changed because the constraints, the condition of possibility, it can have an influence of that, but this is not a necessity. No, you can even not dig in the bed at all. You have set the system, so the external constraints, and then the cycle happens. Then you stop the cycle, and nothing else. If you try to stop an organism, you lose the organ because it's rebuilding. You can stop for a very brief period, okay, but in principle, you cannot stop it because it's building some constraints. You see what I mean?
I do see what you mean, but I
One of the things Evo was saying, that is the interruption. If you take away some species and it starts again, is that necessary for autopoiesis or not? Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I was going to a more kind of philosophical, kind of cosmological level. Kind of, if you really go to like much larger time scales, like not just like I stop it, and when you say stop it, for you and for us implicitly, we are thinking on the time scale of what we are talking about. I'm just talking about like expanding the system to a much wider existence, maybe from the life of a fungi or a human to the living cycle of the planet or of the solar system, because we are philosophizing here, right? So that's what we came for. So and we want to talk about goal-directedness and not just to make models that make us happy within the framework of complex systems as everybody think about. We want to go like kind of deeper. So, and I always the question that struggles me the most when we think of goal-directedness is that we need to end up thinking of the goal-directedness of the universe in the end. Like, because we start from the human who has a goal and so on, but okay, the actions and so on, okay, we restrict the actions to the functioning of this, but then there is always a sort of unfalsifiable step that you can make and say, well, if I look at this as a bigger scale, then this is just part of a larger system, and then the whole system at which everything is this Gaia thing, for example. And then we can go to the solar system Gaia, well, the Big Bang, and then if the universe is always recreating itself, what's the deal? Who cannot ensure that I will be recreated again within this whole entire cycle in the next 7,000 universe cycles? Like that, do we tackle that too?
I would say that this kind of, I agree with this non-refutable claim.
Yes.
It's the universe as a whole self-maintaining system. I mean, I would prefer saying that, can we make more local distinctions? Can we just starting by making a distinction between a cell and a water cycle?
Yeah.
If we are able to do that, I'm very happy. Could you exclude that the solar system is also a self-maintaining system? Let's see later on. You see, I agree with you, these are really big questions, but at a scale where we cannot have a grasp of that, I mean, I have no answer at all, but you cannot exclude that. But are the theory that you are elaborating able to make more local distinction and useful distinction at the scales where we can work?
Yeah.
I mean, many people have argued that autopoiesis, if you take most people, evolutionary people, so they take to work of biology from evolutionary perspective, autopoiesis how do you exclude that the water cycles are autopoietic?
Mm.
But any stupid example, and you are struggling and say, well, because there is no membrane. Wow, this is a doc.
Mm.
Etc. So you see, even a normal scale where you have the obvious examples, work is required to make these distinctions. But I then agree with you that you can scale up.
So this is why I wanted to bring in. I'm not like trying to like make solve that thing, because of course, but just to remember that we need that our discussion is constrained to certain implicit assumptions about time scales, spatial scales, and several things that we take for granted when we talk for too long about it. Just wanted to mention that.
Yes, sir.
We are just because when I heard you, this reminded me of age-old foundational debates in physics. And for instance, there are two main debates that were going on and are still going on. One is in statistical physics. Unfortunately, I have forgotten already how they are called, but it was this position that against Boltzmann, and also Maxwell, who said, why should there be irreversibility if on a most fundamental level everything is reversible? We are talking about reversibility here.
Yeah.
When you have a goal, the physicists call irreversible. It's a kind of a goal. This can be translated irreversible. So how do you get irreversibility out of reversibility? If you have a group of transformations, that's impossible because you would have to leave the group. So a mathematical problem, or it's decided already you cannot. And there has been, I think there is a called Low-Schmidt objection or some, I don't remember actually, but in quantum mechanics I remember because it's more recent. But this applies also to statistical physics, of course. In quantum mechanics, what you describe, it's a kind of Wigner's friend type of argument that has been brought forward already by von Neumann in the 20s, and then by Everett, and then Wigner. And modern terminology, unlike most of this argument, is called nesting. So if you put a little system, including the measurement apparatus, and quantize it, it should behave according to unitary time evolution, which is reversible. And if you pretend this is your measurement apparatus, then you put the whole thing more and more, so you nest it into big, larger and larger chunks. And where should you stop? And the basic problem in quantum mechanics is when you consider this to be a measurement. Because, and there have been even experiments, they call it quantum erasure. Scully proposed that in quantum optics, you can undo certain measurements. You can reconstruct, Schrödinger calls this opening the book, the quantum book, and closing it again, kind of. So these are issues in physics that are unresolved, and deeply troubling, sometimes. Usually one, I would say after a life in physics, most of the people say, well, what Bell calls it, we shouldn't bother about it. And he quotes Dirac. He says, so there are problems that you should bother about and you shouldn't bother about. And Dirac says you shouldn't bother about this. But this is, of course, a way like Feynman said. No, it was not actually Feynman, but Mermin getting very, how should I say, frustrated about this position. Shut up and calculate. He has a famous paper. Shut up and calculate. But I just want to point out that these may be related because goal-directedness and irreversibility may be related.
Yeah, if directionality, I think, cannot exist in a completely reversible universe, right? If everything is reversible, then you cannot really speak about directionality.
Yeah, but they have this discussion already in statistical physics. And there is a very nice philosophical paper by my wrote that can be easily obtained for free. He talks about Maxwell's perception. And Maxwell has a communication and says, you should not take the molecules individually, because then the second law of thermodynamics decays into thin air. There is no increase of entropy. So it's just your position that the grouping, the arbitrary grouping that makes the second law valid. But this has also been brought forward against Boltzmann. So this is I'm totally at loss of understanding it. I understand the problem, but I don't understand the solution.
It's like the liar paradox. And there is a word by Pietro Speroni. Go, Pietro, please. May I unmute? Ah, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I unmuted myself. So I've been following on and off for the whole thing because of the situation. But this whole thing about what exactly is alive and what is not alive, it kind of reminds me of discussions from long time ago. I mean, at the university when we were going to eat, and then we were discussing if forks were alive because they would reproduce themselves or something like that. But going to the goal-directedness, and maybe what we should try to do is to make a map of the organizations of a very simple monocellular organism. And if you've seen a monocellular organism working, you will know that not only it looks alive, I mean, you will have no doubts that it's alive, but it has a purpose. You know, you see the monocellular organism, and then you see food, and you see that it's, you know, it's rising, it's up and it's trying to go and grab the food, and so on. And then you can study it, and then you'll find that there is a certain gradient of sugar, and it will actually follow the sugar, and so on. So if you actually can model and can map that kind of system, that is a system that is simple enough for us to model, but complex enough for us that we can actually see its purpose, see that it actually has a purpose. So this is one of the things that I wanted to say. And the other thing is that the whole idea that we have there is a purpose because there is a goal-directedness and there is free will and so on. I mean, I'm sure this is very well known, but there are a lot of people that disagree with this, and they would actually disagree because when they go and look inside the brain, they're able to explain every decision. You know, they say, okay, this decision was due to this cause in the brain. So it really looks like as long as there is a black box and we look at it as a black box, we get the idea that there is a purposeness. The moment in which we explain it, we lose this kind of illusion in a sense. Okay, maybe not everybody will agree with me. I mean, in any case, I still think that we should model a monocellular organism. Both if you think it should, there is a purposeness or there isn't, that's the kind of middle layer that we can do, and it will really help the discussion. Now I mute myself.
I would like to make a general philosophical observation, which is always coming back in this kind of discussion, which is, what is a model? And there is a big difference between the way that humanities people look at it and the way that people in the physical sciences look at it, and both are extreme in one way. People in the humanities have to say the model is something that you just make for whatever purpose you fit. It's an instrument that gives you power over people, that makes people do things. a physical scientist say a model is an approximation of the real world. So if we have a very good approximation like quantum mechanics, then if we then make another model that is less of an approximation, that model says something different than quantum mechanics, then there is a problem. But a model is always an extreme simplification, no matter whether it's a theory like quantum mechanics or it's a model like the kind of models we are speaking about. They're all extreme approximations. The world is infinitely complex. You take a finite representation of it. Of course, it leaves out so many things. So the fact that there is a model of a bacterium that you could make that looks kind of deterministic and another model that looks kind of purposefulness, people will be kind of, if you're in the humanities, you would say, oh, both models are equal, but I don't care which one you use. It's all just a political decision which model you like. People in the physical science will say, yeah, but this model is the deterministic model, that must be the right one. So if somebody else has this model that has some kind of free will, that must be some muddy thinking. But no model we have can deterministically describe a bacterium. You can say, yes, but if I look at this particular molecule, I can describe it with this quantum mechanical equation, and then it will react with this other. But take all the molecules together, nobody can describe what will happen. So it doesn't make sense to ask, yes, but is it free will or is it deterministic? That's a fake discussion. The discussion is, do you have a model that is predictive for the interesting things, the things you want to know, and in this case, you want to know what is the bacterium going to do, and you say, well, I predicted that bacterium is going to move towards the fruit, so you impute the purpose to the bacterium. That's a very good model. Now, somebody else might want to look at all the different reactions inside the bacterium to try to model where the bacterium is going to go. But it's quite unlikely that that person will be able to predict where the bacterium is going to go, looking at all the different molecules inside the bacterium. So I would say the model that says the purpose of the goal of the bacterium is to move towards the food, that is a good model. It's a good model. It doesn't tell you what all the different molecules inside the bacterium do, but who cares? You want to know what the bacterium does. A good model is a model that predicts the kind of things you want to know. And goal-directed models are good models. We constantly make goal-directed models. As I said, if you see people assembling food in the kitchen, you can assume that they are goal-directed, that they're going to make something. If you see a lion running after a zebra, you can predict from your goal-directed model that the lion is going to try to catch and eat the zebra. It's a good model. Try to model all the molecules and electrical impulses inside the lion's body. You will never be able to predict what the lion is going to do. It's just
that's why we need to merge.
To predict certain things, and depending on what things you want to predict. Some models are good, some are less good. So the question of saying, this is the fundamental model, so that must be right. There is no such thing as the fundamental.
He wants to react.
Sorry, that's exactly why we need to use chemical organization theory. We are trying to find a model which is in between, which is not so abstract that yes, it is a good model of goal-orientedness, but then then that's what we have been doing from the dawn of history, and it's not so precise like a chemical model, but then we cannot actually see goal-orientedness over there. We need to try to find something in between. And that's the whole point of chemical organization theory. And my claim, maybe I'm wrong, but there are several scientists over here that are trying, is that COT can model at some point a monocellular. That's the quest. Maybe you would not be able to, but if we do it, if you're able to do it, then maybe we can merge it.
Yeah, we just don't know how detailed that model will need to be, but I think COT is an extremely flexible formalism. You can go into as much detail as you want or as little detail as you want. And that is why I like COT as a language. It's a modeling language that does not assume that there is a fundamental level. In physics, there is the assumption that there is a fundamental level of elementary particles, and then any other model that works with atoms or molecules is already an approximation of this fundamental model. In COT, there is no such assumption that there is a fundamental level. You put in the species those things that give you the simplest way to predict what's going to happen. That's why COT is a good modeling language, but the model itself, well, we still need to build it.
I think that I just reminded that the organization told me that we must leave the room at 6:30, and it's going to be 7. So this gives me the perfect excuse to close the session and to stop the recording. So to all Alex, Arnold, Pietro, and Christian, thank you for sticking till the end. That's very kind of you. And we will.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, if you want to say, like, thank you.
No, I just want to say thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this super inspiring day.
Tomorrow, 9:30, we will have everything set up, already learn how to do it. So tomorrow we will run more tight on schedule, or more precise. So, okay, thank you very much. See you tomorrow.